The intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Challenging conventional ideas and empowering people with the science of self-propelled motion. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast, hosted by Tony Rich.
An effort is underway to preserve the modern pentathlon on fears that the sport is on the eve of a big change. As first conceived, the event was meant to determine the best skilled person and best soldier.
The Olympic sport currently includes running, swimming, shooting, fencing, and horse riding. That last element, the horse riding portion, is in jeopardy of being eliminated.
40 pentathletes signed this letter last November, addressed to USA Pentathlete Multisport, begging them not to remove horse riding.
Across the whole spectrum, we had Olympians on the list, we had, beginners on the list across the whole spectrum. Sammy Schultz, who was at the Tokyo Olympics, she signed it. Nathan Scrimshire, I believe, signed it. He was at the 2016 Olympics.
Now, 1 year later, participating countries are set to vote on whether to keep the horse portion and replace it with a Ninja Warrior-style obstacle course.
It's going to determine the fate of our sport.
There's a feeling among the athletes that the CEO of USA Pentathlon, Robert Stoll, has pushed for the removal of horse riding in favor of the Ninja Challenge.
Almost put him as the catalyst and the driver of this switch and change of sports, since he was on the board of World Obstacle, as well as UIPM's executive board, as well as the CEO of USA Pentathlon. He's intertwined in all of it.
Now those athletes are also calling for Stoll's resignation.
Now, there was an incident during the Tokyo Olympics that called into question the inclusion of the horses. A coach from Germany punching one of his animals. For years now, athletes have been advocating for horse welfare. Rob Stoll sent me this statement within the hour, writing, quote, "The sports landscape has changed over the 100 years, and pentathlon must evolve to be relevant with the youth of today." Ninja obstacle-style racing was selected from over 60 proposed sports in a year-long process. The Ninja-style obstacle follows the military theme and is attractive to today's youth. I know there are many current and former athletes against this change, but a global Congress will democratically decide.
The messages to our nations, they all want to keep our sports in the Olympic movement. And we have understood clearly what we have to do for the young generations, for the coming generation, that they also have the chance, the dream to fulfill, to be an Olympic athlete.
It's a playground, it's something natural. Everyone can hang, everyone can jump, everyone can go through something. Africans are so good in this. So I think it's very big potential to get Africa into the game with a new discipline.
The sport of modern pentathlon consists of 5 disciplines: swimming, fencing, equestrianism, laser shooting, and running. It's been with the Olympics since the beginning of the Olympics. And now it's in jeopardy of not being a part of the Olympics at all. Those clips encapsulate the circumstances of the issue. The governing body of modern pentathlon, the UIPM, or the Union Internationale des Pentathlon Modern, recently made a decision to substitute obstacle racing for the equestrianism discipline. And this didn't go over well with most of the modern pentathlon athletes. Another decision is coming this October from the International Olympic Committee. They will decide whether or not modern pentathlon will be a part of the Olympics at all going forward in future Olympics. So there's a lot to unpack here. Allegations of horse mistreatment, how we got here, the role of the UIPM, did they do enough? What's going to be the fate of all the pentathletes if modern pentathlon goes away from the Olympics? My guest today on the podcast is going to help me unpack the fate of modern pentathlon. She is Kate Allenby. She is a former British modern pentathlete. She won a bronze medal for Great Britain at the Sydney Olympics. And she is the second Olympic medalist on the endurance experience. And she's now a coach of pentathletes. Kate is involved with an organization, Pentathlon United, which is an independent athlete representative body that represents thousands of pentathletes worldwide. We talk about her background and what got her involved in modern pentathlon, her experience winning a bronze medal in the Olympics. We talk about the history of modern pentathlon and the 5 events. And then we spend a lion's share of the conversation about the decision to substitute obstacle racing for equestrianism. And she's obviously not in favor of the change. And so she gives her stand on what the UIPM could have done better. She also gives her thoughts on the Tokyo incident, or what's being called the Tokyo incident, which put a lot of this in the news. And this was in the Tokyo Olympics, where a horse was caught on video being punched or hit. It didn't really look like a punch to me; it just looked like a hit. But it was a strike by a German coach for refusing to jump a fence. And so she gives her thoughts on what she thinks was behind that. We talk about when this change happens, what she thinks will become of the competitors. What are they going to do? Where are they going to go? How are they going to adjust? And how is the sport of modern pentathlon going to refactor as a result of the change? And then we finish up by talking about if someone wants to get involved in modern pentathlon, whether it be the old world or the new world, modern pentathlon, how do they get involved? So it's a very interesting discussion, and all of these athletes just finished up the World Championship, so congratulations to them. And so, without further delay, I give you Kate Allenby. All right, I am on with Kate Allenby. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the invitation.
You currently coach the sport of modern pentathlon, and if I'm correct, you formerly competed and won a bronze medal in the Sydney Olympics.
Yes, I was really lucky that the peak of my career happened around the time that women's pentathlon got into the Olympic Games. So I was really lucky to be on the start line in Sydney, because only 24 women were allowed on the start line, 2 per nation. And it was amazing being the first female pentathletes to ever have competed in the Olympic Games.
Being a part of triathlon for so many years in coaching, my thought was perhaps triathletes would see modern pentathlon as another sport that they could potentially excel at. Sort of parlay some of their athletic experience into things like fencing and shooting and horseback riding. And so I think we need more awareness of the sport over in the States.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of work for the USA Pentathlon Federation to do to develop the sport more in the States. There's no typical pathway specific. In fact, the fact that it's a real shame that it's not an NCAA sport. In any shape or form.
But I understand the headwind, so I want to talk about that. If someone wants to get involved in modern pentathlon, how should they start? And I want to talk about the history of the sport, and come to our understanding that there is a decision made by the governing body to substitute the equestrian event with an obstacle course event. So I want to get some background on that and how you feel about the change and where do you stand on the change, and maybe if there's any other impending changes that are forthcoming. So how about we start with a little bit more about your background. How did you decide to get involved in modern pentathlon, and then also your coaching experience in the sport?
Well, pentathlon's not the sort of sport where you leap out of bed and go, I know, I'm going to be a pentathlete. There's a journey into it. And in Great Britain, we've got a great equestrian background. An equestrian sport's very strong in our country. And so we have an organisation called the Pony Club, which has a sport in it. You can do any sport in the Pony Club: polo, eventing, dressage, show jumping. And they have a sport which is a modified version of the modern pentathlon, with swimming, running, shooting, and cross-country riding. And at the age of 10, I joined the Pony Club, and they said, oh, you could do a triathlon, which is the winter version, where it's too muddy to ride the horses. So here's a gun, go and shoot, and you can run and swim. Good luck. And off I went a couple of weeks later to my first triathlon. Thought it was the most amazing thing. Came home in first place and thought, this is brilliant. Go and get my pony. Let's go and do triathlon. And then I was aware in 1988 that the men's pentathlon team won a bronze medal in the Seoul Olympics, and thought, well, if I add fencing onto what I do already, I can be a pentathlete. And then one of my people I competed against won a silver medal at the Junior World Championships, and I thought, well, if you can win a silver medal, why can't I do that? So there's real inspiring moments from other people that sort of set me on this journey into modern pentathlon. But it was horses that got me started.
Was that your strongest event of the 5?
Yes, yeah. It was one where I was generally fairly confident hopping on any horse, because as a kid we rode all the time, as often as we could, changed horses, swapped each other's horses, galloped around the countryside, had a lovely time, fell off. It was good fun.
Yeah, it's sort of what we do in triathlon. People will have one strong background or two strong backgrounds, and they'll have a weaker discipline that they have to bring along.
Yeah,
that's hard in triathlon with 5 events. That's even, I can imagine that's even more challenging.
But by the age of 10 or 11, I was already competing in 4 of them. So when I was 16, I added on fencing. And wasn't very good at it to begin with, but actually it became one of my strongest sports. So I would say probably during the games, certainly, and that era, I was really well known as a good fencer and a good rider. So It's interesting how things, you find things, and opportunity comes your way. And I always say, take every opportunity you can, because you'll never know what you missed.
Right. You won a bronze medal. I think that is impressive. When you recall back to that day, winning the medal, what stands out to you the most?
What stands out the most about that day? It was the amazing. Well, the Sydney Olympics was an iconic Olympics. The Australians delivered an amazing games, and for me, it was the first games I've been to, so I knew nothing else. I think the iconic moments about that competition was being able to step onto the track in the opening ceremony and suddenly realizing the enormity of the Olympic Games, because pentathlon's a small sport, and you don't have a massive spectator following. And suddenly you realize what 110,000 people in the opening ceremony stadium looked like. And so then we got on the competition venue, and it all felt very, very familiar. Whereas everything had seemed quite alien and new to you during the games. But the standout moments were I loved being in the arena at the fencing. Really enjoyed those fights and the atmosphere. But that was mostly because so many British spectators and friends and fans had come out, and there was just big swathes of Union Jacks in the crowd. So that was the fencing was brilliant. And then in the riding arena, that they delivered such a great event. Again, there were so many Brits in the crowd. You really felt like it was your place. And then by the time there were 2 of us, me and my teammate Steph, who won the gold medal, when we finished the running event, because we'd done so well, loads of the Aussies folded up their Aussie flag. And so the corner was showing the Union Jack. And suddenly it was just this sea of Union Jacks in the crowd. So it was amazing. But it was the best part, I guess, was competing in front of your friends, your family, knowing that they've made the effort to be out there to support you when, you know, all the journey to get there and all the years of training, you know, you'd missed an awful lot of things to get there. But actually the appreciation once you were there was just so lovely to have them all there. When I was competing in the pony club, I was in the Great Britain team, and we went over to the United States to compete. And I met one of the girls on the US team, a girl called Mary Beth. And I was sat after the races had all finished, and we're waiting on the medal ceremony. And Mary Beth finished in fourth. And I sat next to her, and we sat and chatted. And she was really down because she was really sad. But you know, fourth place is one of the best places to be in the Olympics, but it's also the worst place to be because you're the first one that doesn't get a medal.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, Mary Beth, I've known you since I was about 16 or 17 years old. Who would have imagined that you and I, who were, you know, young, naive competitors back then when we first met, when we were 16, now 10 years on, here we are sat on the greatest stage of the world, and we've just finished right at the top of the sport. And we both looked at each other and went, my God, that was a heck of a journey we've been on. And it was just a real privilege to be sat with her, being able to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And that was a really special moment. And she's been a great friend ever since. In fact, the results were 1, 2, 3, 4, Brit American, with Emily Dereel in second place. And all of us have had we had a reunion in 2000 when the COVID times were all on. We all met on Zoom and had a glass of champagne each to celebrate each other.
Incredible. Yeah. And that's what I want to get across as we have this discussion with the listeners, is that this is an important sport, and there are athletes that revere this sport. And so having you tell that story sort of sets the stage. Now, as we get into the decision, this big change that the governing body has made to substitute the equestrian event. So how about we talk about this? So the history of this sport goes back how long? Say hundreds of years, or is it 50 years? How long is it?
Sport's been in the game since 1912.
Mm-hmm.
It was created by Baron Pierre de Coubertin as supposed to be the Victor Ladorum, the greatest all-round athlete of the Olympic Games. So it was a sport created especially for the Olympic Games. And that's the most enormous part of our history, is that the guy who invented the Olympic Games invented this sport for the Olympic Games. And so it's his legacy that we as pentathletes feel that we carry. And it's no burden at all, because it's a real privilege to be able to carry on that legacy. And that's what the athletes feel, is that de Coubertin started this sport and he chose the sports. And who are we to be able to change that?
Right. Exactly. So that's impressive that this sport actually started at the beginning, was the reason why we largely have an Olympic Games. So this big change by the governing body, which is my understanding is UIPM.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk first about what went into this monumental decision. And obviously, if they're targeting the equestrian event, I suspect there's some reason why they are doing this. Was there a sort of backlash about the treatment of horses, or what was in your opinion the catalyst to the change?
So it's really interesting. You look back through the history of how all these things come to pass, and actually this was all going on way before the Tokyo Olympics and the scandal of the Tokyo Olympics. But there's enough evidence to show that this was all being discussed before that. Whether the UIPM planned for it to happen in 2021, or whether the catalyst was Tokyo, I think it was in the planning anyway. I think it was probably going to happen, maybe not this cycle, maybe next cycle. but it was going to happen. But because of what happened at Tokyo, I think it was triggered early.
I saw something about this. You described that the thing that happened in Tokyo that was publicized widely. Something about a coach hit a horse or something like that.
It was something's not going to go well, guys. You need to do something about your horse welfare. But actually, horse welfare is something that hasn't been addressed in the sport for a very long time. And the current president has been in place for 30 years. And there has been, he's changed, he talks about change all the time, and he's made some massive changes to the sport. It's changed from 2-2 to air pistol to laser pistol to combined event, from a 5-day event to a 1-day event, to now this 90-minute format. But you look at the riding and it's never, ever been addressed. And it's sort of the frustrating thing is that the athletes historically have asked for the riding event to be addressed. There've been protests before. I led a protest back in 2002 where they wanted to put in some new format that was not safe for the athletes or the horses. And that nearly caused a whole bunch of athletes to be eliminated or not invited to the World Championships. But that was a pretty hasty U-turn when the president realised how many athletes were actually behind not agreeing with this, and things changed.
Right.
And then there was another protest in 2014 at a competition where the athletes just sat down and said, well, look, we're not doing this because the horse welfare, horses aren't looked after properly, the horses aren't well, these aren't a good pool of horses to use, and we don't want we don't want to ride them because it's not right. So there's a lot of things that should have been done historically, but what's frustrating is that the International Federation seems to have gone down this path without addressing what could have been done. And that's what the athletes are really upset about, is, look, what did you do to try and preserve our equestrian discipline? And it doesn't look like very much. And they've done this sort of disappearing off down into a alleyway of this obstacle racing. But actually, when you take a step back from it all, it's not about the riding. It's not about the horses. It's actually about the commercial viability of the sport. How many people, I said at the start, not very many people watch pentathlon.
Yeah.
And it was incredible walking into the opening ceremony and seeing what 110,000 people look like. But it's the responsibility of the International Federation to grow the sport. And they haven't, in 30 years, they haven't grown the sport. The digital engagement isn't there. They have so few followers on socials. And so the IOC have gone to them and said, what's the commercial value? Reduce the cost and complexity, and the commercial value of the sport has to actually be something for us to have you in our program.
Mm-hmm.
The athletes don't feel that the commercial that has been addressed. It's been this big, we need to get rid of the horses so that we can change everything. But actually, that's banking on the American Ninja Warrior audience coming over into pentathlon.
Yes.
But you look at what American Ninja Warrior is, and that's based on people falling off and failing. Whereas what the UIPM are doing with the obstacle racing is pushing people through to success. So it's not about failing, it's about success, which is
that the type of obstacle race that they want to substitute with the
it's sort of, I think it's styled on an American Ninja Warrior.
Oh my goodness.
And it's, anyway, the sport is it a sport or is it a TV show? That's the first question. And how big is the sport behind the TV show? Has it got a big audience appeal? Has it got, and are these people going to come across into our sport? So you take a step back from that and go, do fencers come into our sport? Do runners come into our sport? Which people are the people that go, hey, I'm doing this sport and I want to be a pentathlete? And historically, people come from equestrian or swimming backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
But the obstacle racers aren't going to come along and learn how to do swimming, fencing, laser shooting for 40 seconds of ninja, obstacle, OCR, whatever. And is the audience going to come across from American Ninja Warrior, where it's a TV show which is styled for excitement, for drama, for interviews, for people falling off equipment into great big puddles of water?
Yeah.
That's television, but is that going to transition across into a sport? And then you compare that to the likes of cricket, which brings the majority of the Indian subcontinent across as a commercial value to the IOC. And that's what we're competing against in this decision. So it's really depressing to look at what the International Federation could have done. When you look at the likes of, dressage, when Snoop Dogg starts tweeting about
I remember. I saw that.
Yeah. And, that's turned the equestrian sport around, they picked up enormous amount of value from those sorts of things. And they've just given, FEI have just given an equestrian influence. They're part of a TV channel on FEI TV. There's really clever things that they're doing to boost the commercial value of the sport. And yet none of this seems to be happening in pentathlon. It's really, really frustrating. Yeah. And it's a real shame because you see we're marching on this journey to where the IOC are going to make a decision.
Yeah. And so you're saying that they're making it all about horse welfare. What is their chief concern? Because part of the sport is the athletes are supposed to ride on a horse they're unfamiliar with. That's a part of the sport. Is that right?
Correct. But why not address what the test is? If we need to bring the equestrian test into the modern world, let's make a test where, which does bring audience appeal, that does bring access to horses, because, that the pentathletes, they ride to the rules, and the rules are set in a way that doesn't encourage them to ride very often. And so the standard of riding is getting lower and lower. Because the standard of riding is getting lower and lower, people don't want to lend their horses. But if the test was changed, where it was a test of horsemanship rather than ability to jump over a jump, then I think you would have a different standard. You would have different points available. There would be a better relationship between the owners because the horses would have a better time. And frankly, horse welfare sits with the International Federation. That's one of their jobs, is to look after the safety of the athletes and to look after the safety of the horses, rather than have it listed as a piece of equipment.
Right. Yeah. So instead of, I'm pretty decent on horse. I can walk, trot, canter, but Brilliant. I've never tried to jump.
It's amazing. It's like you're flying.
I would like to try it sometime, but I can see how if a novice rider is riding a horse they're unfamiliar with, that could cause some challenges. But I think you're right. Why not change it to if it's maybe dressage or even racing? I don't know. Changing the test would changing the test greatly change the fundamental principles of the sport?
Nobody knows. Nobody's ever tried it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know? And that's what's at the crux of what the athletes feel, is that nobody's tried to make the riding more modern. These laser pistols have come in. They've changed. They're chopping every games. They chop and change what they're doing, which smacks of lack of confidence in your product. Mm-hmm. For starters, but also it doesn't. And so if you're chopping and changing everything else, why aren't you trying to work with the World Equestrian Federation to make sure you're nailing the athlete safety and horse welfare? Make sure your rules actually reflect that you understand horses and that you understand how to keep our athletes safe.
Yeah. Okay. And so where do we stand now as far as rules? And are there any forthcoming rules? So you mentioned the IOC has a forthcoming ruling.
There's going to be a decision in October with the IOC session at the IOC session in Mumbai about what the new sports are going to be on the Olympic program, and boxing, weightlifting, and modern pentathlon are going to be reassessed for re-inclusion back on the Olympic program.
Okay.
But back in 2021. When UIPM came up with this idea, UIPM, the International Federation, came up with this idea to remove the riding, the athletes all said, if you go to the IOC with 4 sports and an unknown 5th, which was what was voted on at Congress, the IOC cannot include you in LA 28 because they don't know what they're including. And the UIPM still went to the IOC and went, we voted to replace the fifth discipline. And this is what you would like to consider if you're considering the program for LA 28. And the IOC promptly went, well, we can't consider anything because we don't know what it is. So you're out. And the athletes were like, oh, we told you that was going to happen.
Okay. And then so the decision in October will spell what's going to happen with modern pentathlon in the next Olympics. So that's the next Olympics is right around the corner.
No, it's going to be in Paris.
It's going to be in Paris, right?
With horses. With horses.
Okay.
And so there's the question over what have they done to change the rules and to make the athletes more safe and to get the athletes in the saddle more often, and to protect the horses. What have they done there? And I guess, as you watch the lead into the games, done there or what they haven't done there. And then the decision in October is for the LA 28 program.
Okay, got it.
But that's where they're also deciding in Mumbai. They're deciding what the other sports are going to be that are trying to get into the program. So that's the likes of baseball, softball, cricket, tag rugby, etc. It's called flag football.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's where the NFL, some NFL players have said recently that they're going to, if flag football gets in, then the NFL players are going to join the teams or try to make the teams. And, that's massive. That will be a big draw from the American spectators. Your audience will rocket if there's going to be a big NFL players suddenly in the games.
Yeah. I mean, when I learned about it, I said, wow, because triathlon is big in the United States.
Yeah.
And I said, well, running, swimming, there's two of the events there. If we can, I think a lot of triathletes would consider this as an option and would probably actually do very well.
Did you see the pathway that Sheila Taumina took?
No, I did not.
Sheila Taumina. So Sheila Taumina was a gold medalist in the 90. I think she was in the 96 games as a gold medalist, and then she went to triathlon. And then in 2008, she tried to make the US pentathlon team, and she ended up in the team. And she competed in 3 different sports, 3 different Olympics, and competed in the modern pentathlon in Beijing in 2008. So it's a pathway that's been trod before.
Yeah, incredible.
Amazing story, amazing athlete.
So obviously, you represent the counter to the governing body decision. So if they make a decision to change this to an obstacle course, the equestrian event to an obstacle course, what are you going to do, right? And what is your lobby going to do? So you represent Pentathlon United, an athlete representative body. I think over 95% of those athletes were not happy with the announcement of the change. So if they change it, what are you going to do?
Well, they have changed it. They have changed it. At the Congress last year, it was voted to put obstacle racing into the statutes. Mm-hmm. And so now and they also voted for junior and any competition under the age of 21, so junior, youth, under 19, youth under 17 competitions have had obstacle racing in them. And they've started competing in modern pentathlon with obstacle racing. But I think Pentathlon United does what the athletes want and operates it with what the athletes want. And I think Joe Chung has made a statement a few months ago saying, I think there's going to be a big walkout of athletes after Paris. So a lot of the current athletes are going to leave, have said they're going to leave the sport. So that would, I don't know whether because, if they're reaching Paris and reaching the end of their career, they leave. If they're reaching Paris and they might have gone on to LA, but they don't think obstacle racing's for them, they said they're going to step away. So the massive generation have said they're going to step away from the sport. And then that leaves some athletes below them who've been, doing the obstacle racing this year, juniors and under 19s and under 17s. And, they're aspirational. They want to go to the Olympic Games. So, they're trying to make change. But you feel really sad for some of them, because there were some really talented riders who've now had to sack that off and go and learn how to do obstacle racing. And maybe they're not as successful. Maybe they are more successful. But nobody really knows, because nobody's really done it. Yeah. It's only this year that they started doing obstacle racing, and you can see some nations have had more access to the rigs and the training facilities than others. And so you can see there's a difference in level of competition and level of ability. There's also the competition rules haven't been set. They're still learning about the competition rules. So before now, it said before this year, it said in the competition rules, you're not allowed to tape your hands in any way, shape or form when you shoot. But the athletes have been coming off the rigs with their hands ripped and wanting to tape them so that they can put them into their gun, because their hands are shredded here from the rigs. But they've been told that in the rules it says you can't tape your hands. Right. And so there's some really tricky things going on there. But then these athletes are the ones who are suffering. So it's really frustrating to see these young athletes who are just can't understand. They haven't had the time in the training to build the calluses on their hands, and they will in time. But they were being asked to compete in multiple rounds of fencing, 3 pentathlons in a week, and their hands were shredded, and it was really painful to watch. But that's something that will happen over time as their hands build up the calluses. But it's been really tough for them to jump into a new sport, be required to leap through 3 or 4 rounds with really, really sore.
Yeah, that is going to take an adjustment, because when I see those American Ninja Warrior type of obstacle course, it's a lot of body weight suspension and suspending your own body weight, climbing.
Well, there's somebody who won or did very well in American Ninja Warrior who's training to go to LA in climbing, not pentathlon.
Right.
So why would ANW people transition across? Well, they're a little bit older, the ANW competitors, aren't they?
Yeah. Now, as a coach, will this affect you? Are you still going to coach?
Yeah, I've got some of my athletes are competing this weekend at the Laser Run World Championships, which the Laser Run, we've got the Modern Pentathlon World Championships this weekend in Bath, or this week in Bath. A little bit similar to the formula they use at the Triathlon World Championships, where you've got the age groupers come in, and so it makes it a big event, big atmosphere, brings in spectators, brings in money. And then you have the elite race in the middle of it, which is the pinnacle of the whole thing. So they run age group Laser Run World Championships sort of around the World Championships. And so I've got some under 15, some under 17s, a masters athlete and a under 13 competing this weekend, which is really exciting for them. They're to be able to compete on a World Championships format venue where it's an Olympic qualifying competition at the same time. They're so excited about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, a lot of them have come from a riding background, those kids. And when the decision to remove the riding came up, they turned to me and went, "But that's our best event. What are we going to do?" And I was like, "Guys, well, let's start off with Laser Run and let's, build it up." And they've done trips to American Ninja Warrior play parks. And, they're moving forwards. But until the decision in LA, it's really hard to get them moving forward, because there aren't, they could start training in obstacle racing, but there aren't any facilities for them necessarily to go and train at locally. And there aren't any coaches, because I'm not a qualified coach to be able to coach that sport. And until the decision about LA, is it a pathway they want to go on, or do I want to steer them in a different direction? Where they have got a pathway. So we haven't done an enormous amount of obstacle racing training, but they've had a go to see if they like it.
Interesting.
They've been training hard in the other sports, and I'm really proud of them to compete this weekend.
Yeah, and this is going to refactor. It's going to refactor the entire sport. Sounds like.
Yeah. Because commercial value of the sport. You look at sports like equestrianism, probably with the Global Champions Tour with the in show jumping, with the dressage circuit that's there, with the eventing circuit, with badminton, the Kentucky, the Rolex Grand Slam, the likes of those sports. They can probably survive outside of the Olympic movement, but modern pentathlon couldn't.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's the saddest thing of all, is that we've gone down this journey, put obstacle racing, bastardized our sport, and we still don't know if we're necessarily going to get into LA or not. And if we don't get into LA, people will turn around and go, well, what on earth did we switch out riding for?
Yeah.
Because the IF, the UIPM were the ones that went to the IOC with 4 sports, and we'll tell you what the 5th one is. Why did we even need to do that?
Yeah, that seems like it was a self-inflicted wound.
It's been self-inflicted for 30 years. So when you ask what the athletes want to get rid of this current administration and bring in a group of people that are modern, fresh, new ideas, new ways of working, commercial people with an ability to build a commercial product, to make the sport, put the sport in its place as de Coubertin wanted it to be, as the main event of the Olympic Games. The Victor Ladorum of the Olympic Games. It's not that, is it, at the moment?
Well, we'll have to see what happens in October, but I'm hoping many of those athletes find a way. Some of them will make their way into triathlon if they don't want to.
There's pathways that they can go on. Yes, there's triathlon, there's fencing. Some of them could go into shooting. There's different pathways that some could go on, but some might not have that pathway because they are the ultimate multi-sport athlete that doesn't specialize. Yeah,
you've been gracious with your time there. So if we can maybe finish up on something positive. Maybe there is someone out there saying, I think I want to try that. I think I want to try that sport, with the understanding that it's currently in flux right now.
But that's what you've got to create. You've got to create a vision of where people do look at it and go, wow, I want to try that. Yeah. And you see what the FEI have done, the Equestrian Federation have done by putting show jumping courses, competitions on next to the Eiffel Tower. At Kentucky, they build amazing fences that aren't necessarily as difficult as they look to ride, but it just creates an incredible picture, and people look at it and go, wow, I really want to do that. And this is where the current administration just have failed to see that this is how you inspire, this is how you engage. And those wow moments of, I wish I could do that. That's what your average spectator wants, is they want to see somebody in Taekwondo doing that amazing kick above their head, or a horse jumping over something, or like Snoop Dogg said in the dressage, look how he's walking.
Right. Yeah.
They want those wow moments to engage those different audiences that they've never that haven't seen the sport before. Is obstacle racing going to do that?
Yeah. So, just for people who are unfamiliar, how do the events, what's the sequence of the events, and where is the obstacle course going to fall now in that sequence?
Well, that's another interesting thing, is that the sequence, I think it's going to go swimming, fencing, obstacle racing, laser run. Certainly the last 3 are going to be obstacle racing, laser run. If you're bringing in this new sport and it's supposed to be really exciting, and you want to create a really exciting, people to watch it, it needs to go to your finale, coming up that ramp at the end of American Ninja Warrior, touching the buzzer. Surely you want that to be your Olympic gold moment. But instead they go from the obstacle racing to the laser run, which is exciting. Mm-hmm. But if you want to bring in this sport to be the catalyst for change, surely you put it as your last event.
Yeah. Was a lot of work put into this? It doesn't sound like there was a lot of work put into, or bringing the athletes in and having a united confluence of opinions on this.
Well, if they've been talking about it too, this is why I said earlier that it was triggered early, that maybe this was the plan from a way back. and they wanted it to happen, but it was triggered early because of what happened in Tokyo. If you want to bring it in as a sport, you have this product called Laser Run, and you have another product called Biathlon, which is swim, run, swim. It's a shortened version of what the triathletes do. Run, swim, run. And why not bring it in at that level so that you've got kids coming in at the bottom of the sport doing laser run and obstacle racing. And you did that 4 or 5 years ago, and then you grow it so those kids come through, and suddenly you've got something which is, has grown sort of quite organically. But instead they've thrown it in at the top level, thrown everything out of the water. They've thrown it in like a grenade. And that's why I think it was they pressed the trigger early, and it hasn't worked because they haven't taken the population of the sport on the journey with them.
Yeah. And what do you make of that? So when I just did some Google searches and about what you call the Tokyo event that was captured on, what did you make of that? It just seemed like the horse wasn't responding for some reason.
So you step back from the event and you look at what was asked of those horses, and they were in a warm-up arena, which was outside of the stadium. And then probably 10 minutes or so before their arena time, which is the time they're due to go into the arena to jump, they were taken out of that warm-up arena. Horses are herd animals. They will walk down a long corridor into a stadium, and horses don't tend to do that. So they don't have much familiarization on that. And then they were put into a holding pen to wait whilst the horse in front of them was jumping. Now, when you're preparing yourself for an event, you warm up the horse so that when you get into the arena, you're ready to go. You don't walk down a long tunnel that's spooky, then stand still for however long you stand still for, and then go in and jump. You want the horse. You need the energy of the horse. You need the horse focused. You need yourself focused, and you don't do that by standing still for a few minutes. So everything that was organized for those horses was unfamiliar and unusual for them to deliver their very best performance. And then you remember that there was no spectators in the stadium, and also look around the rest of the stadium. There was an awful lot of spooky things for the horses to deal with. And so the environment was quite a challenging environment, and you haven't even asked them to compete yet.
Yeah.
And I don't know what familiarization that they did with the horses. I hope that they were brought through that a lot. But until that week, I suspect the horses hadn't ever encountered anything like that before in their lives. They'd been to horse shows, they'd been and competed at horse shows, they'd been in all of the equine environments where you compete, but I doubt there was that environment that the horses had come through before. So you can see already that's quite challenging before you've pressed go for a competition, before you've started to jump really big jumps, and before you've had any Olympic medals contested.
Mm-hmm.
So I am not surprised things went wrong.
And so from the athlete's perspective, it's not the athletes, it's larger things that the governing body should have put in place or should put in place, not necessarily that, it's just these, because the idea is that, these inexperienced athletes are just jumping on these horses and making them trying to make them do things.
It's really difficult to get on a horse and ride it for 20 minutes and then jump a track that big. Really difficult. And you look at the rules, and the rules are set in a way that don't encourage you to get onto a horse very often. And so you've got the rules set in a way that it's more important in terms of points and pathways to finals and things like that. It's more important to establish yourself as an athlete in the other sports before you get in the saddle. So you've got the athletes coming from a place of they don't ride enough because of the way the rules are set up, and an environment where the horse is familiarization and normal way of usual environment is upended. Mm-hmm. And you've got a pressure cooker ready to go off.
Yeah, and that's the perfect storm of events that have.
And it's a perfect storm.
Yeah. Okay.
But those are things that are under the control of the current administration. You know that if you're paying attention to these things, you know that they're going to happen, that you know that they're red flags. And yet the riding event hasn't changed for nearly 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's too bad that this is one of the founding events of the games. And we'll have to.
I mean, the whole situation is very sorry and very sad. And, you know, it makes me sad thinking about it all. But here we are.
Yeah. Well, let's finish up and talk. If you could give some advice to someone, how would they start? I mean, I've never seen a modern pentathlon club or anything in the States or anything like that. How would you recommend that they start if they wanted to get involved?
In what sort of modern pentathlon?
Just, yeah.
One with obstacle racing or one with horses?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I guess that's the real question now. You know, obviously, you know, in triathlon with swimming and running, but how does one get involved in laser shooting? I don't know where I would start if I wanted to improve my shooting skill.
Well, I guess that comes down to the way the sport is delivered in the US by the US Federation. You know, in Britain, we've got pentathlon clubs, and we've got kids who progress from pony club. In the United States, you've got the US Pony Club. And why there aren't any links, many links sending pony club kids, riders who were athletes, into pentathlon, I don't know. But there are also, in Britain, we have pentathlon clubs which deliver laser run to kids. And, you know, I guess they work as hubs. Britain's a smaller country. They work as hubs. And so they draw people in. That's how it works in the UK.
I see.
And it just requires, you know, swimming clubs to develop a biathlon arm to it, because frankly, biathlon should be one of the easiest sports to access.
Yeah.
Because you just have to swim and run. You don't need any specialist equipment.
Right.
So, you know, develop yourself from a swimming club and add on a biathlon arm, and then add triathlon, which is swim, run, shoot, and bring some lasers in that way, or make it an NCAA sport, so the universities are funding it, or, you know, so you can pick up athletes at university level of swimmers who maybe have done their time in the pool but still want to swim, who can run, or find athletics clubs who can find kids who swam as youngsters and bring their swimming level back up. There's so many different ways you could do it, but I guess that's a question for the USA Pentathlon Federation.
Yeah. Okay. You've been generous with your time. If people want to find out about Pentathlon United or find your coaching resources, how would they do it? Where are the web links that they should?
We're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Just Google Pentathlon United on any of those and you'll find our Twitter handles. We've got a Facebook page, pentathlonunited.com.uk. Mm-hmm. It'll come up.
I will put the links to them in the show notes.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks again for your time. We'll look forward to what happens in October. And hopefully.
It's going to be an interesting moment.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks again to Coach Kate Allenby for coming on to the Endurance Experience and talking about this issue. You can find all of the links to Pentathlon United in the show notes. I definitely feel for the athletes. If the IOC decides that modern pentathlon will continue to be a part of the Olympics going forward, it will be a part of the Olympics in a different type of modern pentathlon. The equestrianism discipline will be replaced with obstacle racing. And that means it's going to be an entirely different sport, maybe even different competitors. The sport will refactor, and who knows if it will have an impact. If they decide that modern pentathlon will no longer be a part of future Olympics going forward. Well, then that is an even worse scenario, where you have a sport that has been involved with the Olympics from the beginning is no longer a part of it. Either way, this coming Olympics in Paris 2024 will be the last showing of modern pentathlon as we know it. Horseback riding is a fun activity. I've been doing it since the early 2000s, just leisure, recreational activity. And they are beautiful and majestic creatures. And nobody wants to hear that those animals are treated badly or were treated badly, or circumstances rose to a crescendo where they were mistreated, or the sport was driven to a point where those athletes had to spend less time on that discipline. I know what this is like. In triathlon, when you're doing a discipline that has multiple sports, it becomes an opportunity cost decision. What do you spend more time on in order for you to maximize your opportunity cost of time, in a sense, maximize your chances of winning? Now, the proposition from UIPM and some of the other leaders, well, maybe we can evolve this sport, maybe we can try to get more people involved with the advent of the obstacle racing discipline, get people from other parts of the nation, increase inclusivity, get people from Africa, get people who don't have horseback riding skills or were never exposed to horseback riding skills. I guess I understand that, but you're talking about refactoring an entire sport that has been there since the beginning. So I'm interested in hearing more from UIPM and their perspective. I did try to reach out to them to try to get them on the podcast. I didn't hear back. So we'll see if there's any news that will come out of this in October. Nevertheless, to the pentathletes of the world, congratulations on the World Championships that just finished up and this coming Olympics in Paris, regardless of what the decisions are next month in October. This will be the last showing of modern pentathlon as we know it. And if this is going to be the last showing of modern pentathlon as we know it, then my hope for you is that medals or no medals, you go out there and show the world one last time and do it with pride and do it with enthusiasm. Show them how professional you can be at the sport and at equestrianism, and never let them forget the sport of modern pentathlon.
Follow Event Horizon Endurance Sport on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for training programs and services. To become a member of our Endurance Institute or for a complete archive of podcasts, log on to our website, eventhorizon.tv.